For today's video, we'll be turning to one of the most famous names in naval history, especially if you study the Pacific War, because the Battle of Samar is very well known. And of the ships present that day, two of them stick out more than any other. USS Johnston was one, and a ship I've covered before. The other was the topic of this video. USS Samuel B. Roberts. Sammy B, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. That nickname does, in the end, describe her actions that day rather well. Samuel B. Roberts would fight harder than anyone could have asked her to. This was a small, slow escort, a ship intended to chase submarines or shoot down aircraft, not to go charging battleships and cruisers. Yet, that is what she did. Sammy was by no means unique in this, of course. The other escorts of Taffy 3 would do much the same. However, very few ships would make a headlong charge into danger quite like this one. A charge that she would pay the price for, with the ship battered into a flaming wreck. Samuel B. Roberts would ultimately sink on the morning of October 25th, 1944, but not before making the Japanese bleed. And that is, of course, why this ship is so well remembered. However, before we get into all of that, let's set the stage. When a new ship was laid down in Houston, Texas. That ship, laid down on December 6, 1943, was one of 83 John C. Butler-class destroyer escorts. Relatively small and cheap ships, with this reflected in the construction period. Though, before that, a brief detour to her name. Samuel B. Roberts was named for a Navy coxswain who volunteered for a rescue mission on Guadalcanal. He steered his Higgins boat right at Japanese gunners to distract them and protect his comrades. That would end with his boat taking fire trying to withdraw, which mortally wounded Roberts. He would be awarded the Navy Cross for his efforts, and have the topic of today's video named after him as well. A fitting name, as we'll see. But back to the construction now. Samuel B. Roberts was launched on January 20th, 1944, and commissioned on April 28th of the same year. A very fast construction period, no matter what kind of ship you're looking at. Although, not a very surprising one. This was the American shipbuilding industry at its finest. And, as noted, this was also a small ship, displacing no more than around 1,700 to 1,800 tons when fully loaded, with a hull of 306 feet, 93 meters in length, and a beam of 36 feet, 8 inches, or 11 meters. By comparison, a contemporary Fletcher-class destroyer was around 2,500 tons on a length of 376 feet, 114 meters. To reflect that smaller size, the weapon load was also lighter, consisting of just two single 5-inch 38 caliber guns, one each on the bow and stern, with a single triple torpedo mount amidships. Even the anti-aircraft weaponry was relatively light, 4 40mm Bofors guns and 2 twin mounts, and 10 single 20mm cannon. Most of the weaponry came in the anti-submarine loadout. 8 depth-charge throwers, 1 hedgehog mortar, and 2 depth-charge racks on the stern. But, well, for defending against aircraft or submarines, this was enough. as 2 was the relatively low speed of around 24 knots as designed on 12,000 shaft horsepower through 2 shafts. Regardless, that brings us to the end of the design. Now for the service, which, as noted, began on April 28th of 1944, quite late into the Second World War, especially when you take into account sea trials as well. She would spend May through early July 1944 fitting out or training. This was largely uneventful, as sea trials typically are. In early July, however, this would change. On July 7th, 1944, the ship experienced, and I quote, 2 very strong jars throughout the ship. This originated in a collision with something underwater as the destroyer Escort sailed along. Not a submarine, but something decidedly more organic. Most likely a whale. There was a pool of blood in the water, estimated at 30 yards in diameter and 30 feet deep, 27 and 9 meters respectively. There was a, quote, large fish floundering in the water at the center. That fish was likely the whale, or what was left of it after being chopped up by the warship. And I really do need to emphasize chopped up here. The captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, put Sammy through tests. The ship would have issues reaching 20 knots related to severe vibration. As such, the Escort returned to Norfolk on July 9th, where an inspection found a bent starboard prop, a damaged sonar, scraping on the starboard side, and pieces of fish, whale really, still stuck to the hull. Repairs were prompt, and Copeland was cleared of any wrongdoing. It was a freak accident. And considering what Copeland would do off Samar, a very good thing he was cleared. In any event, Samuel B. Roberts would finally wrap up her trials by the end of July, setting out on July 22, 1944, to escort a convoy to the Panama Canal. This was uneventful, as was sailing through the canal. On the other hand, when the convoy left on July 28th, things would be more eventful on the voyage to Pearl Harbor. On 2 different occasions, Roberts would make contact with merchant ships. The first around 2 a.m. on August 7th. The destroyer Escort would flash out a challenge after spotting a contact on radar. The mystery ship responded, incorrectly as it turned out, and continued to do so over and over again, until Copeland, banking on the ship being American due to her position, appearance, and heading, sent out a plain language message. Identify yourself or I shall open fire. The presumably terrified merchant promptly replied, wait, before changing course, along with sending out the proper codes. This was a Liberty ship, William B. Allison. Later that morning, the same incident repeated itself. Sammy spotted another merchant, sailed over, and sent out the challenge. The merchant continued to send the wrong response until Copeland threatened to open fire, prompting the ship, a tug, Bald Head, to properly respond. Samuel B. Roberts' war diary reflects Copeland's frustration. It would seem that after almost 3 years of war, our merchant marine would realize the significance of a challenge and would devote more time to training their watch officers and signalmen in the method of reply. Frustrated or not, the captain continued to escort his convoy. The group arrived at Pearl Harbor on August 10, 1944. For the majority of the month, Samuel B. Roberts would remain in and around Hawaii, on rest or training. She only departed again on August 21st to escort a convoy to Eniwetok. Nothing much would happen during this, with the ship arriving safely on August 30th. A brief shore leave followed before she set out again on September 2nd to return to Pearl Harbor. A few sonar contacts proved to be nothing, and the convoy arrived on September 10th. Another convoy would wrap up the month from the 21st of September through the 30th. It was only at this point that the destroyer Escort was sent on to the front line. Samuel B. Roberts received orders to sail for the Admiralty Islands on September 30th, 1944. This would be her final mission, because when Sammy B. arrived in the Admiralties, she was immediately assigned to the liberation of the Philippines, more specifically to protect the escort carriers, which were in turn covering the landing forces. The escort would continue on this duty through October 19th, when Samuel B. Roberts was reassigned, not to a different mission or anything of that nature, just a change in formation, as often happened in big operations like this, with the specific case involving the escort carriers and their escort. Samuel B. Roberts would be grouped up with 6 escort carriers and 6 other smaller warships as part of Task Group 77.4.3, Taffy 3, a famous formation for the events that would soon follow. At first, this wouldn't have been at all apparent. Taffy 3 took up station off the island of Samar, where the escort carriers continued to send strikes ashore to support operations on Leyte, while doing double duty in covering the transports from any potential Japanese airstrike. This was much the same duty that they had been doing, but with a change in name and location. That's how it would continue from October 20th through the 25th. It most likely would have lasted longer too, had the Japanese not intervened. Their final desperate attempt to counter the American Navy, with much of the remaining Japanese naval strength committed to a 3-pronged assault against the American landings. A southern force would sail up Surigao Strait, while a northern force, consisting of most of the surviving carriers, would draw Admiral Halsey and Third Fleet away, leaving the most powerful formation, the center force, to run rampant through the transports. Or so the plan went. The southern force would be annihilated, while the center force was ravaged by submarines and airstrikes. Probably the only part that went according to plan was the northern force. It did draw Halsey away, leaving Taffy 3 alone other than aircraft from the other Taffy formations, when the battered center force crested the horizon on October 25th, 1944, around 6:50 in the morning. Taffy 3's commander, Admiral Clifton Sprague, was quick to take action. As soon as the Japanese were spotted, the escort carriers turned away. Those ships and their smaller escorts began to make smoke. It was the proper choice in this scenario. None of the Taffys were any sort of match for battleships and heavy cruisers. To run away was really the only option. But the escort carriers could only run at around 19 knots at most. They would never escape a determined pursuit. Aboard the destroyers and destroyer escorts, their captains and crews were quick to realize this. The only way to protect the carriers was for the escorts to make near-suicidal charges on the Japanese fleet, force them off, and maybe, just maybe, do some damage of their own, in concert with similarly desperate attacks by the Taffy planes. Aboard Samuel B. Roberts, Commander Copeland knew this as well as anyone. He told the crew they were entering a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival could not be expected, during which time they would do what damage they could. All the while, Japanese shell fire began to sprout up around the Taffy ships. Lookouts on Sammy B reported green and purple dye landing near her stern. The Japanese ships used different color shell dyes to aid with spotting, creating a surreal multicolored effect during the battle, especially when coupled with the thick smoke screens laid down by the Taffy ships. That smoke was the first thing that Samuel B. Roberts did during the battle. The ship joined up with Johnston and Hull, laying thick black funnel smoke around 7 a.m. That smoke, coupled with more traditional white smoke, created a thick curtain. Thick enough that for about 15 minutes, the Japanese fire trailed off. A chance rain squall showing up around 7:16 provided further cover. Sammy would remain inside that squall for about 11 minutes all told, until at 7:35 the fateful order came through. The escorts would charge the Japanese fleet and send out torpedoes. Initially, this would have been the destroyers first. Then the slower destroyer escorts would follow up with a second charge. Captain Copeland had clarified this, knowing that his ship wasn't as fast or well armed as the Fletchers. However, events would overtake that plan. None of the other destroyer escorts formed up. Copeland, despite knowing that his hands were ice cold from fear, made a choice. He would lead the destroyer escorts. His crew made calculations to strike a Japanese cruiser, only for USS Heermann to sail close by and nearly collide with Roberts. This was evaded, thankfully, but it threw things further off. Sammy B pulled in behind Heermann, Johnston, and in the lead, Hull. Ultimately, the destroyer escort would launch her torpedoes at around 8 a.m., after closing to around 4,000 yards from the Japanese fleet. One was spotted hitting an enemy cruiser, while the other two missed. Although Sammy was undetected at first, her crew prepared her guns. It was clear they wouldn't stay unnoticed forever. As the ship pulled away, she would open fire around 8:05, firing with her two 5-inch guns at a distance of around 10,500 yards, quickly falling to 8,500 as time went on, until around 8:15 the escort maneuvered away, only for a short break as it turned out. First, Roberts had to avoid Johnston and Heermann after those two nearly hit each other, and then she returned to engaging the Japanese directly. By 8:55, Sammy was engaging a Tone-class cruiser at ranges varying from 7,500 to 6,000 yards, so close that the cruiser in question, Hornfisher notes it as Chikuma, couldn't depress her guns to hit the little destroyer escort. Sammy B, meanwhile, fired over 500 shells from her two guns, absolutely riddling the Japanese ship's superstructure, though doing little damage outside that. Unfortunately, despite this duel going well, Samuel B. Roberts would run out of luck eventually. At 8:51, she took her first hit. This was below the waterline near the number 1 handling room, rupturing steam lines and putting the forward fire room out of action. The brave little ship promptly dropped down to around 17 knots. More hits would soon follow, the number one engine room was knocked out. A large shell, either 8 or 14 inch, hit the aft deckhouse, wrecking the 40mm guns positioned there. Soon after this, the fatal hits would arrive. Around 9 a.m., a massive explosion rocked the ship. Lundgren notes it being 2 or 3 14-inch shells. Those tore a hole around 30 to 40 feet, 9 to 12 meters long in the side. That wrecked the number 2 engine room and started fires on the stern. The ship was out of power, helpless. All the while, the remaining 5-inch gun continued to fire, until an overheated powder charge caused the barrel explosion. Truly helpless now, Sammy B was abandoned around 9:10 a.m. The crew jumped to the water as their brave little ship sank stern first at 10:07 a.m. For 50 hours, those men remained in the water. They would only be picked up by a group of LCIs, landing craft infantry, on October 27, 1944, with 120 of them surviving the sinking, leaving 90 missing and dead. For their bravery, Samuel B. Roberts would gain one of the most famous nicknames of any ship, the destroyer Escort that fought like a battleship. As another note to wrap things up, Sammy's call sign for Taffy 3, Juggernaut. Hard to be more unintentionally fitting than that. Her wreck, for its part, was found in June 2022, continuing this ship's proud legacy in another way, by becoming, as of this recording, the deepest shipwreck ever found. 6,895 meters, 22,621 feet below the surface. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.